The sun was merciless that afternoon, a blinding white eye hanging over a sky the color of iron. Heat shimmered above the dusty streets of Red River, a small western town too stubborn to die and too mean to be forgiven. The air smelled of dry sweat, horses, and gun oil. It was the kind of day when tempers ran short and kindness ran dry. A crowd had gathered near the old wooden platform that served as both a gallows and an auction stage. The same place where over the years cattle had been sold, drifters punished, and pride broken. Today it was being used for something far worse. A man in worn military clothes, his uniform sun-bleached and his voice thick with arrogance, stood on that stage with a rope in one hand and a smirk on his face. Beside him stood a woman, her wrists tied in front of her. She was tall, proud, and silent. Her skin was a deep bronze touched by sunlight. Her long black hair was braided loosely, falling over her shoulder like a river of shadow. Dust clung to her torn dress, but her posture, straight, unyielding, made her look like a queen standing among beggars. Her name was Nayeli, though no one in that town cared to ask. The soldier cleared his throat and called out to the gathering men. "Gotta find one here. Strong, young, and obedient enough if you keep a firm hand. Captured her myself. Apache tribe near San Carlos. She'll fetch a good price for anyone with sense." Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel and careless. "Obedient?" One man scoffed. "She looks like she'd bite." Another spat tobacco juice near her feet. "Bet she don't talk none neither." Perfect for a man who don't want backtalk. More laughter. Nayeli didn't move. Her dark eyes looked straight ahead, fixed somewhere beyond the crowd, beyond this day, beyond this shame. Among the crowd stood a man named Daniel Brooks, a quiet rancher, mid-30s, lean from years of work and solitude. He had come to town that morning for rope, nails, and coffee, nothing more. He didn't like people much. The townsfolk knew him as the man who kept to himself, who buried his past deep out on his land. He stood now at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, jaw tight. He wasn't sure what made him step closer, but he did. Maybe it was the way the woman's chin didn't tremble despite the insults. Maybe it was the soldier's tone, that hard, barking voice that made Daniel's blood boil. Or maybe it was that he saw in her something familiar, the quiet strength of someone who had already lost everything yet refused to bow. The soldier shouted again, "We'll start at $20. The air went still. "20, he barked again. No one spoke. Then someone snickered. "Ain't worth 20 cents. I'll give you 5, for the novelty." The crowd laughed. The soldier frowned. "She's worth more than that. Look at her arms. She can work." The laughter grew louder. Someone tossed a coin that clinked near her bare feet. Daniel's stomach turned. He could hear the men's words, not just what they said, but what they meant. The sound of humanity scraping the bottom of its own soul. Without thinking, his voice broke through the noise. 30. The laughter stopped. Heads turned. The soldier blinked in surprise. $30? Daniel nodded once, a pause. No one countered. The soldier grinned. "Going once, going twice, sold." The crack of his hand on the wooden podium sounded like a gunshot. For a moment, Daniel just stood there, wondering what he'd done. He hadn't come here to buy anyone. He wasn't even sure why he spoke. All he knew was that if he hadn't, he wouldn't have been able to sleep that night, maybe ever again. The soldier shoved a piece of paper toward him, a crude bill of sale. "Sign it," he said, sneering. "She's yours now, cowboy." Daniel signed without meeting his eyes, then counted the money out of his worn leather wallet. The soldier cut the rope from the woman's wrists and shoved her toward him. Nayeli stumbled forward but caught her balance quickly, eyes flashing for just a heartbeat. Sharp, intelligent, defiant. Daniel stepped closer, gently touching the rope burns on her wrists. "You're free of that now," he said softly. She didn't answer. He led her through the murmuring crowd toward his horse. People whispered, laughed, judged. One woman hissed, "Disgraceful." Another man called out, "You can't save 'em all, cowboy." Daniel ignored them. He helped Nayeli onto his horse. She hesitated, then mounted with the grace of someone who had been raised on open land, not behind fences. He climbed up behind her and clicked his tongue. The horse started forward, hooves kicking up a storm of dust that swallowed the sound of their laughter behind them. They rode in silence. The trail stretched for miles, Dry hills, endless plains, and the faraway blue of the mountains. Daniel could feel her tension, the way her back stayed straight, refusing to lean against him. He didn't try to talk. The words felt heavy and useless. When they finally reached his ranch, a small spread of land tucked between two ridges, the sun was melting into the horizon. The sky burned orange and gold, and the air had cooled. He dismounted and offered his hand. She looked at it for a long moment before sliding down on her own. "This way," he said, leading her to the small cabin he'd built with his own hands. The place was plain, one room, rough wood but clean. A small barn sat nearby, horses whinnying softly inside. He opened the door for her. "You can rest here." She stepped inside, her eyes scanning everything, the old table, the iron stove, the single bed pushed against the wall. Her face betrayed nothing. Daniel went to the corner, filled a tin cup with water and handed it to her. She took it, drank, and set it down carefully. "I'll make something to eat," he said quietly. He stirred up a simple stew, beans, salt, a bit of dried beef. He placed a bowl in front of her. She waited a moment, then sat down, eating slowly, politely, like someone trained not to take more than allowed. The firelight flickered across her face. Strong features, soft eyes. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing second. Finally she spoke. "Why did you buy me?" Daniel froze. He hadn't expected her to speak, not yet. Not in that calm, steady voice. He set down his spoon. "Because what they were doing was wrong." She studied him. "And yet, you paid for me. You gave them what they wanted." Her words struck deep. He opened his mouth to reply, then closed it. There was no answer that would make sense. "You're free here," he said at last. "You can stay tonight, eat, rest tomorrow. You can go wherever you want." She tilted her head slightly, her dark eyes glimmering in the firelight. "No one buys freedom," she whispered. Then she looked away, gazing out the small window toward the vast, starlit plains. The night wind moved her braid like a shadow across her shoulder. Daniel watched her in silence. Something about her presence filled the cabin with both peace and pain, like a memory of something he'd lost long ago. He went outside, needing air. The porch creaked beneath his boots. The sky above was endless and alive, 1,000 stars burning like prayers. In the corral, his horses snorted softly, the sound of their hooves steady and grounding. He sat in his old chair, listening to the desert night. Inside, he could hear her moving, cleaning the dishes he'd used, folding the blanket he'd given her, moving quietly as if to erase her own presence. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the dark. He thought of the look on her face when he cut her free. Not gratitude, not fear, but something harder. Dignity, the kind of strength that survives what should have broken it. Hours passed. The fire inside dimmed. When he finally went back in, she was sitting by the fire, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The light painted her face in golden shadow. He stood for a long time before finding the courage to speak again. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "Naili." He nodded slowly. "That's a strong name." She didn't respond. He sat across from her, unsure what else to say. The silence between them was strange, not empty, but full of something unnamed. Finally, she looked up, her eyes meeting his. "You cannot change what they see when they look at me," she said softly. "But maybe one day you will learn what I see when I look at you." Daniel frowned slightly. "And what's that?" She turned her gaze back to the fire. A man trying to heal something he didn't break. Her words hit deeper than any bullet could. He wanted to ask more, to understand her meaning, but she rose quietly, spread her blanket on the floor near the wall and lay down, facing away from him. Daniel sat there long after, staring at the flickering fire. He thought about her words, her strength, her silence, and though he didn't yet understand it, he knew his life had changed the moment he spoke that single word in the crowd. 30. Outside, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying the promise of a story just beginning. The desert light crept through the cracks in the cabin walls, drawing pale golden lines across the wooden floor. Outside, the world was still, the distant cry of a hawk, the whisper of dry grass swaying in the wind. Inside, Daniel stirred from his chair, the fire long dead, his body stiff from sleeping upright. He blinked, disoriented, then saw her, Niley, sitting cross-legged on the floor near the window, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She hadn't run. She hadn't left in the night as he half expected. Her hair was loose now, spilling down her back like a black river. She was quiet, still as stone, her face calm but unreadable. Daniel rose slowly, his voice low and careful. Morning, she didn't turn. The sun has already been awake for hours. He smiled faintly despite himself. Guess I'm slower than the sun. Still no answer. He poured water into a pot, lit the stove, and began to make coffee. The smell filled the small room, warm and sharp. When he turned, she was watching him now, not with fear, not even curiosity, but something like quiet study. You don't lock your doors, she said. No reason to, he replied. No one comes out this far. Her gaze held his. You shouldn't be so sure, Daniel shrugged. If trouble comes, it's already halfway beaten. Most men who look for it don't find much more than they deserve. A flicker of amusement crossed her face, the ghost of a smile that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. He set a cup of coffee down in front of her. It's bitter, he warned. But it's good, she didn't drink. You said I was free. You are. Then why am I still here? Daniel didn't have an answer that made sense even to himself. He looked at her for a long time before saying quietly, Maybe because this is the first place that hasn't treated you like less than human. The silence that followed was long and heavy, but not hostile. Something in her eyes softened, only slightly. She took the cup, lifted it to her lips, and sipped. The next few days passed like that, slow, uncertain, edged with unspoken questions. Nayeli didn't speak much. She worked instead, sweeping the cabin, mending things that needed mending, tending to the horses without being asked. Daniel tried to offer help, but she always refused with a gentle shake of her head. One afternoon, he found her in the corral standing beside his mare, Dusty, the only creature he trusted more than himself. The horse was usually wary of strangers, but with Nayeli she was calm, ears twitching as the woman whispered softly in her native tongue. Daniel leaned on the fence, watching in quiet awe. You got away with her, he said. Nayeli didn't look up. She listens because I speak to her with truth. Animals don't understand words. They understand hearts, he nodded slowly. You talk like someone who's lived more than one life. She brushed the horse's mane, her voice distant. Maybe I have. Word travels fast in small towns, even faster when it's soaked in judgment. By the end of the week, Red River was buzzing with rumors. They said Daniel Brooks had gone mad, living out on his ranch with a savage woman he'd bought like cattle. At the saloon, men whispered. At the general store, women clucked their tongues. The sheriff, Harlan Price, shook his head when he heard it. Can't save every lost soul, he muttered to his deputy. Man's asking for trouble. And trouble came soon enough. It started with Earl, one of Daniel's ranch hands. A heavy man with too much pride and too little conscience. He'd been with Daniel for a year. But the sight of Nayeli stirred something mean in him. Something that had always been waiting for an excuse. One hot afternoon, Daniel came back from the south pasture to find Earl leaning against the corral, smirking. Nayeli was nearby, carrying a bucket of water. Didn't know we were hiring squaws now, Earl said loud enough for Daniel to hear. You training her for housework or something else? Nayeli didn't flinch. She kept walking, her steps measured, but Daniel saw her fingers tighten around the bucket's handle. Watch your mouth, Daniel warned. Earl spat. Ain't no harm in saying what everyone's thinking. You bought her, didn't you? Folks in town say you're keeping her warm at night. The bucket hit the ground, water splashing across the dust. In the next second, Daniel's fist connected with Earl's jaw. The sound cracked through the yard like thunder. Earl staggered, caught himself, and lunged back with a growl. The two men crashed into the dirt, swinging, grunting, dust rising around them. Nayeli shouted something in Apache, her voice fierce, sharp like an arrow cutting air. Daniel took another blow to the ribs, but answered with one that sent Earl sprawling. He stood over him, chest heaving, voice like gravel. You don't talk about her. You don't even look at her. Get off my land. Earl wiped blood from his lips, sneered, and spat near Daniel's boots. You'll regret this, Brooks. You've already lost half the town's respect. Now you'll lose the rest. Then I'll keep what's worth keeping, Daniel said. Earl laughed bitterly and stalked off toward his horse. Don't say I didn't warn you. Men like you don't last long standing with people like her. He rode off in a cloud of dust. Daniel stood there, breathing hard, knuckles bleeding, He turned toward Nayeli. She was still standing by the fence, eyes dark and unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. He had no right. She stepped closer. He spoke truth of what others think. "That doesn't make it right." She studied him, her voice low. "Why fight for someone the world calls less?" He swallowed hard. "Because the world's wrong." For the first time, she looked at him not as her captor or savior, but as something in between. A man trying to bridge an impossible distance. She knelt down, picked up the bucket, and filled it again from the well. When she returned, she took his hand gently and poured cool water over his split knuckles. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But in that silence, something changed. Something unseen and irreversible. That night, Daniel sat on the porch again, the stars bright and endless above him. Inside, he could hear her humming softly, a tune he didn't recognize, haunting and beautiful. He closed his eyes and let it wash over him. He thought of how she'd looked standing in that auction square, proud, even in chains. He thought of the way she'd spoken to the horse, to the fire, to the silence itself. There was a power in her, not the kind that comes from force, but from spirit. The kind that survives when the world tries to erase you. He didn't know what the days ahead would bring, but for the first time in years, he felt alive again. When he finally went inside, Nayeli was sitting by the hearth, weaving thin strips of rawhide into a small braid. "What's that for?" he asked quietly. She didn't look up. "Protection. The spirits listen to those who show care." He hesitated, then asked, "You really believe that?" She looked up then, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Belief is not the same as hope. Belief is remembering that the wind still moves even when you cannot see it. Daniel nodded slowly. "Then I reckon I believe too," for a moment. Their eyes met, two souls from different worlds connected by pain, by loss, by something deeper neither could yet name. Then Nayeli looked back to her weaving, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sleep now, Daniel Brooks. Tomorrow will not be gentle." Her words carried a weight he didn't understand, not yet, but before dawn he would. Daniel noticed it before dawn, a restless hum through the trees, a shift in the air that carried a strange electricity. Out on the plains, clouds gathered low and dark, like the sky itself was brooding. He sat on the porch, boots resting on the step, watching the horizon glow faintly with lightning. The smell of rain drifted on the wind. It hadn't rained in months. He turned when he heard the cabin door creak. Nayeli stepped out, wrapped in a blanket, her hair unbraided and wild around her shoulders. The early light touched her face in silver. "You feel it too," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "Storm's coming?" She looked up at the sky. "Not just a storm. The earth breathes again. It remembers itself." Her voice had that tone again, the quiet certainty of someone who spoke not from guessing but from knowing. Daniel didn't argue. He'd learned there was wisdom in her silences, and truth in her riddles. They worked through the morning, moving tools and feed into the barn, securing the horses, covering the firewood. By afternoon, the wind howled, bending the trees and sweeping dust across the yard. The first drops of rain fell heavy as stones. When the storm broke, it came all at once. Thunder rolling across the plains like the sound of old gods waking. Daniel slammed the barn door shut, just as the sky opened. Sheets of rain hammered the roof, the ground turning to mud in minutes. Nayeli stood in the doorway, eyes closed, arms lifted slightly as if welcoming it. He shouted over the noise, "You'll get soaked." She didn't move. "Let it come. The land has been thirsty for too long." He watched her for a moment. The way the rain clung to her skin, the way her face softened with peace, and something stirred inside him, something he didn't want to name. When night came, the storm still raged, lightning flashing through the cracks in the walls. They sat by the fire, the air warm and damp. Nayeli was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. Then she said, "When I was a child, I was told that storms are messages, the sky speaking to those who listen." Daniel looked up. "And what's it saying now?" She hesitated. "That change comes like thunder. It scares the weak but feeds the brave." He smiled faintly. "That sounds about right." She turned to him. "Do you fear change, Daniel Brooks?" He stared into the fire. "Used to. I reckon I still do. Lost my wife and boy to smallpox 5 years ago. Since then, I've kept everything the same. Same meals, same chores, same silence. I thought maybe if I didn't move, time couldn't find me again. Nayeli listened without a word. When he finished, she said quietly, "Grief is not a wound that closes. It's a door that teaches you how to walk through pain." He nodded slowly. "You speak like a preacher." Her lips curved faintly. "Preachers talk about heaven. I talk about truth." Days passed. The storm gave way to clear skies and air so fresh it smelled like new life. The grass began to green again, small flowers pushing up through the mud. Something shifted between them. Subtle, unspoken. Daniel found himself listening for her voice when she was outside, noticing the small things she did. How she left bits of corn near the door for the birds. How she whispered to the wind when the sun set. How she always faced east in the morning before saying a quiet prayer in her own language. One evening, as the sun bled into the hills, he asked, "What do you say when you face the sunrise?" She hesitated, then answered, "I thank the Creator for another chance to see the world with clean eyes." "That's beautiful," he said. "It's survival," she replied. "When you have seen cruelty, you must remember that beauty still exists. Otherwise, you become what hurt you." Her words stayed with him long after she went inside. Weeks passed and life found a new rhythm. Nayeli worked the land as if she had always been there. She knew herbs that could heal burns and fevers, knew how to find water by the way the plants bent toward the wind. She tamed the wild horse Daniel had given up on months ago, whispering to it in Apache until it bowed its head like a humbled child. At night, she told stories, not with flourish or drama, but with reverence, as if each word carried a living spirit. One night, under a bright full moon, she sat outside by the fire and began one such tale. "When I was young," she said, her voice soft, "my grandmother told me about a white bird that carried lost souls across the sky. When people died with anger in their hearts, the bird could not lift them. They stayed bound to the earth until forgiveness was spoken over their names." Daniel listened quietly. "Do you believe that?" She looked at him, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "I believe we all have birds waiting for us, but many of us keep them from flying because we cannot let go of what others have done." He felt a heaviness in his chest, the memory of the disease that took his family, the helpless rage he'd carried for years. He stared into the fire. "Maybe my bird's still waiting too." Nayeli leaned closer, her tone softer now. "Then free it, Daniel Brooks. You cannot build a life with chained wings." That night he dreamed of his wife and son for the first time in years. They stood by the river smiling, their faces whole and warm. He woke with tears on his cheeks and the strange feeling that something inside him had unclenched. When he stepped outside, the dawn was just breaking, pale gold spilling over the hills. Nayeli was already there, standing barefoot in the grass, her face turned toward the sun. He watched her quietly, realizing she wasn't just surviving. She was healing the land around her. And maybe him too. But peace never lasts long in a world that hates what it doesn't understand. A rider appeared on the trail that afternoon, dust cloud trailing behind him, horse lathered with sweat. It was Sheriff Harlan Price. He pulled up near the corral, his badge glinting in the sun. "Brooks," he called. "We need to talk." Daniel walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. "What's the matter, Sheriff?" Price's eyes flicked toward Nayeli, who was mending a fence not far off. His expression hardened. "It's about her," he said. Word spreading. Folks in town are riled up. They don't like the idea of an Apache woman living out here with you. They say it ain't right. Daniel's jaw clenched. "And what do you say?" The sheriff sighed. "I say people will do foolish things when they're angry. I can't promise they'll stay civil. Maybe it's best if she moves on." Daniel stepped closer. "She's done nothing wrong." Price lowered his voice. "I know that. But this town, it's got long memories and short tempers. I'm trying to keep you both safe." Nayeli had stopped working. She stood still, her gaze calm but alert. Daniel shook his head. "She stays. This is my land, my home. No one's running her off it." The sheriff's tone grew firmer. "Then you'd best be ready for what's coming." He tipped his hat and rode away, dust swirling behind him. Nayeli walked up beside Daniel, her face unreadable. "The wind carries warnings before storms," she said. He looked at her. "You think they'll come?" Her eyes were steady. "They already have." That night the moon rose full and white, casting silver light over the cabin. Inside, Nayeli lit a small fire and placed stones around it. She murmured softly in Apache, her voice steady and rhythmic. Daniel watched from the doorway.
What are you doing?
Calling for protection, she said simply. Not from bullets, but from hate. Hate can pass from one heart to another like sickness. He stepped closer. Can you really stop it? She looked up, her eyes reflecting the firelight like mirrors. No, but I can teach you how to walk through it without losing yourself. Daniel nodded slowly, his heart heavy but sure. Then teach me, she smiled, small, real, almost shy. Then listen to the earth, Daniel Brooks. It speaks even when men do not. Outside, the coyotes howled, and the wind carried the scent of sage and rain. Inside, two souls sat by the fire, a cowboy haunted by ghosts, and an Apache woman who carried the memory of a nation in her silence. Neither of them knew it yet, but this night would mark the start of something that would change them, and the town, forever. A strange stillness hung in the air, the kind that comes before something heavy, something that cannot be undone. The sky was wide and cloudless, but the light felt brittle, as if the sun itself were holding its breath. Daniel stood outside the barn, repairing the broken fence plank that the storm had torn loose. His hands worked, but his mind was far away. He kept replaying Sheriff Price's warning. You'd best be ready for what's coming. He didn't want to believe it. He wanted to think the world would leave them alone. Two people, quiet, working, surviving. But he knew better. The West didn't forget. It didn't forgive either. From the corner of his eye, he saw Nayeli walking toward him, a woven basket on her hip filled with wild herbs. Her long hair was braided again, loose strands catching the wind. She looked peaceful, almost otherworldly. But he noticed the quiet tension in her shoulders. They came to the edge of the ridge this morning, she said softly. 3 men. They didn't speak, but they watched. Daniel straightened. From town? She nodded. One of them wore a star. He exhaled slowly. The sheriff's trying to scare us into giving up. Nayeli met his gaze. Fear is a weapon only if you let it be. He managed a small smile. You sound like someone who's fought plenty of battles. I have, she said simply. Some were with men. Most were with silence. By noon, a dust cloud rose on the horizon. Daniel shaded his eyes. 4 riders, armed, moving fast. He stepped off the porch, hand resting on the rifle propped against the wall. Nayeli came beside him, standing tall. The riders stopped at the gate. Sheriff Harlan Price was among them, his expression tight. The others were townsmen. Earl, the fired ranch hand, and 2 others Daniel recognized from the saloon. Price dismounted slowly. Afternoon, Brooks. Sheriff, Daniel said flatly. The sheriff's gaze flicked toward Nayeli. We didn't come here to start trouble, just to end it before it begins. Daniel crossed his arms. You've already started it by coming here armed. Earl spat on the ground. We're here to fix a mistake. She don't belong out here. Not with decent folks. Daniel's jaw tightened. You call yourself decent? Earl's hand brushed the butt of his gun. You calling me something else? Before Daniel could speak, Nayeli stepped forward. Her voice was calm, but it carried through the air like a blade through cloth. You fear what you do not understand, she said. But fear will not make you stronger. Earl's face reddened. You shut your mouth, woman. The sheriff raised a hand. That's enough. Look, Daniel, this ain't about hate. It's about peace. You know how this town thinks. They see her, they think danger. You're stirring up bad feelings and folks won't let it go. Maybe she should move on and for her own good. Daniel's eyes hardened. You think peace means giving in to prejudice? Sometimes peace means knowing when to walk away, the sheriff said quietly. Daniel took a step closer, his voice steady. No, Sheriff. Sometimes peace means standing your ground when the world tells you to kneel. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind picked up, stirring dust between them. Finally, the sheriff sighed, shaking his head. You're a stubborn man, Brooks. I tried to give you a choice. Now it's out of my hands. He mounted his horse. The others followed, but Earl lingered just long enough to glare. You'll regret this, he muttered, then spat again and rode off. Daniel watched them go, the dust settling behind them like a warning. Nayeli stood beside him, eyes distant. They will come again, she said quietly. I know, Daniel replied. But I'll be ready. That night the air grew heavy. A storm was brewing, not from the sky this time, but from men. Nayeli sat by the fire, grinding herbs into a bowl. The smell filled the cabin, sharp and earthy. What are you making? Daniel asked. Medicine, she said. For the heart. He smiled faintly. You think herbs can fix that? She looked up, her expression serious. No, but they can remind you it still beats. Daniel sat across from her, the firelight flickering between them. You've been quiet tonight. I listen when the wind changes, she said softly. It's speaking again, he leaned forward. What's it saying? That you should not sleep too deeply. Her tone was so calm it made the hair on the back of his neck rise. He wanted to ask what she meant. But before he could, she stood and moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. They are close. He rose, grabbed his rifle, and moved beside her. Out in the distance, faint lights flickered. Lanterns. Moving shapes. Horses, damn it, he whispered. Nayeli turned to him. Go to the barn. Free the horses. We must leave. He shook his head. No, I'm not running. You must, she insisted. If you fight, they'll call it justice. If you live, you can prove them wrong. Daniel's voice hardened. And leave you here to face them alone? Her eyes flashed. You don't understand. They came for me, not you. He stepped closer, gripping her shoulders. Then they'll have to go through me first. She stared at him. Anger, fear, and something softer all flickering in her gaze. Why do you do this? She demanded. You owe me nothing. He met her eyes, voice low and steady. Because I don't fight for what I owe. I fight for what's right. The sound of hooves grew louder outside. Nayeli grabbed his hand. Then fight with wisdom. Not rage. The first gunshot shattered the night. Glass exploded from the window. Daniel ducked, pulling Nayeli down. The second shot hit the door frame, splintering wood. He crawled to the table, grabbed extra shells, and fired through the window. One clean shot that sent the attackers scattering. Voices shouted outside. Burn it down. Flames caught quick, torches hurled against the barn. Smoke rose into the black sky. Daniel cursed under his breath, rushing to the door, but Nayeli caught his arm. You cannot save the barn. Everything I have is in there. Her eyes blazed. Then you must choose an wood or life. He hesitated only a moment, then grabbed her hand and pulled her out the back door. They ran through the dry grass toward the canyon beyond the ridge, the fire painting the night orange behind them. The mob's shouts faded with distance, replaced by the pounding of their own hearts. When they finally stopped, the ranch was a glowing ruin on the horizon. Daniel sank to his knees, chest heaving, eyes full of smoke and loss. Nayeli stood beside him, her face lit by moonlight. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She simply knelt and placed her hand on his shoulder. This is not the end, she said softly. Fire destroys what is weak. It leaves behind what is true. He looked up at her. Her hair wild in the wind, her face calm even in ruin. And something inside him broke open. He reached for her hand, his voice raw. I can't lose everything again. She looked down at him, eyes glistening. Then stop living as if you already have. The words hit him deeper than any bullet could. He stood, turned toward her, and before he could think, the truth fell from his lips. Nayeli, I don't want you to leave, she blinked, surprised. You want me to stay here? In a world that hates us both? He stepped closer. I don't care what the world thinks. You're the only thing that's made sense since I lost everything. Her breath caught. You speak like a man chasing a dream. Maybe I am, he said. And maybe that dream's standing right in front of me. The silence that followed was thick and trembling. Then, softly, almost a whisper, You don't belong to me, Daniel Brooks. He shook his head. No, but I want to belong to you. For a long moment she didn't move. The wind rustled through the canyon grass, and far away the fire still burned, painting the sky red. Finally she whispered, You cannot marry a woman the world calls enemy. He met her gaze. Then let the world call me what it wants. I'm done living by its lies. Nayeli closed her eyes, a single tear tracing down her cheek. When she opened them again, something had changed. The walls of pride and pain softened into something fierce and tender. Then tomorrow, she said, voice barely audible, we stand beneath the canyon moon. And if the spirits accept us, then you and I will belong to no one but each other. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. Then tomorrow it is. They stood together, silhouetted against the burning sky. A man who had lost everything and a woman who had survived the worst of humanity. And somewhere above them, the moon broke through the clouds, silver and still, silent witness to the vow neither of them had yet spoken aloud. The dawn after the fire came pale and ghostly. Ash floated in the wind like gray snow, and the air still smelled of smoke. Daniel and Nayeli stood on the ridge above what had once been his ranch. The barn was gone. The cabin was blackened wood and ruin. Only the chimney still stood crooked and defiant. For a long time they said nothing. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice low. "Everything I built, everything I worked for." Nayeli's gaze was steady. "They burned wood and walls," she said. "But they cannot burn what you carry here." She placed her hand over his heart. "That is what they truly fear." He looked at her, the calm in her eyes, the strength that seemed to hum quietly beneath her skin, and realized something. The land wasn't what made a man rich. It was what he chose to stand for. He turned toward her, voice thick. "You said the spirits would see us tonight," Nayeli nodded. "Yes, the moon will rise over the canyon. That is where vows are heard, not by men but by the world itself." That night the canyon was alive with silver light. The moon rose full and round, washing the red rocks in pale gold. The air shimmered with quiet. No sound of horses, no human voice, just wind and river and heartbeats. Nayeli stood barefoot by the edge of the water. Her long hair was loose, gleaming like black silk. Around her wrists she had tied small ribbons of red and white cloth, Apache colors for life and truth. Daniel came toward her slowly, his shirt clean but torn, his hat in his hands. He had never felt less sure of himself, or more sure of what he wanted. When he reached her, she smiled softly. "The spirits of this canyon are old," she said. "They have seen blood and peace, love and hate. Tonight they will decide if two paths can become one." He nodded. "Then let them decide." She stepped closer. "Before the wind, speak your truth." Daniel swallowed hard, then spoke. "I was a man who thought silence was safer than pain. I lost everything and thought life had ended. But then I saw you, standing proud when the world tried to shame you. You reminded me what it means to be alive. You reminded me that courage isn't about fighting. It's about staying human. I don't want to own you. I want to stand beside you." Nayeli's eyes shimmered in the moonlight. Then she lifted her chin and answered, "I was taken from my people, from my land. I was told I was nothing, a thing to be sold. But you saw me when no one else would. You gave me no cage, no chains, only choice. And that is freedom. You speak of love, Daniel Brooks. Then let your love walk, not rule. Let it breathe, not bind. If you can promise that, then I will stand with you until the sun forgets to rise." Daniel smiled through tears. "Then I promise." She reached for his hands. Their fingers intertwined, rough rancher's palms and soft healer's touch, and the wind seemed to lift around them, carrying their vows into the canyon. The moon shone brighter. Somewhere an owl called, a sound of approval in the stillness, and in that moment they weren't white or Apache, man or woman, master or slave. They were simply two souls, equal, alive, bound by respect deeper than blood. By morning they returned to what was left of the ranch. The ashes were cool now, the land quiet. Together they began again. They rebuilt slowly, not for wealth but for peace. Daniel cut new timber. Nayeli planted herbs and corn along the riverbank. Each act of rebuilding felt like defiance, a silent declaration that kindness would outlast cruelty. But peace never lasts long when hate still breathes. One afternoon, weeks later, a group rode into the valley. The same men who had burned Daniel's barn, Earl among them, his pride now hollow. They stopped near the fence, dust rising around them. Earl dismounted, sneering. "Heard you two had a little ceremony in the rocks," he said. "Ain't that sweet? Shame it won't matter when the sheriff comes to take her." Daniel straightened. "You already took everything else." "You won't take her," Earl laughed. "You think you can fight the law? The whole town wants her gone. You think you can stop that with words?" Before Daniel could answer, Nayeli stepped forward. Her presence silenced them instantly. She wore a simple white shawl and stood tall, her chin high, eyes steady. "You burned this land," she said calmly, "but the land still breathes. You tried to shame me, but I stand. What does that make you?" Earl's smirk faltered. "The world is changing," she continued. "You can fight the wind, but it will still blow." The sheriff's voice came from behind the group. "That's enough, Earl." Everyone turned. Sheriff Price rode up slowly, his face pale, his jaw tight. "Sheriff," Earl snapped, "we're here for justice." Price dismounted, walking toward Daniel and Nayeli. "You've already had your kind of justice," he said, his voice low. I saw what your torches did. The town's talking, not about her but about you. Earl frowned. What are you saying? The sheriff turned to Nayeli. Word spread that you saved the Miller boy during the fire. Is that true? Nayeli hesitated, then nodded. The flames were high. He was trapped behind the barn. I pulled him out. The sheriff's eyes softened. His parents told the whole town. Said you risked your life for him. Earl's jaw dropped. She's lying. No, the sheriff said sharply. You're lying to yourself. That woman has more decency than half this town. The other men shifted uneasily. Earl's face reddened, fury replacing fear. She's tricked you all. She's enough, the sheriff barked. I said enough. Silence fell. The sound of wind moving through grass filled the air. Then the sheriff turned to Daniel. You've got yourself a good woman, Brooks. You treat her right. Daniel nodded. Always. The sheriff glanced at Nayeli, then tipped his hat. Ma'am. It was one word, small, simple, but it carried the weight of history behind it. A gesture of respect where there had once been only scorn. Nayeli inclined her head gently. Thank you, Sheriff. The sheriff turned back to the others. You men go on home. This land's got its peace now. Let it be. Earl glared, his pride shattered, but he said nothing. He mounted his horse and rode off, the others following, dust trailing behind them like the ghosts of their shame. When they were gone, Daniel exhaled slowly. He looked at Nayeli, awe in his eyes. You changed their hearts, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. No, they changed their own. I only gave them a mirror. He reached for her hand. You're something else, you know that? Nayeli laughed softly. No, I'm just what they never bothered to see. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Daniel and Nayeli stood together by the rebuilt fence, the scent of sage and cedar thick in the air. The town might never fully understand them, but that didn't matter anymore. For the first time, the world around them felt still, as if even the wind had decided to listen. Daniel turned to her, smiling. You know, the men in town used to call me the loneliest man in the valley. She looked up at him, eyes soft. And now? He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Now they'll call me the luckiest. Nayeli smiled, her voice a whisper carried by the wind. Then let them call you what they will. They watched the last light fade behind the mountains, hands intertwined. In that quiet moment, justice had already been served, not through revenge, but through grace. The sun rose slow and red over the valley, spilling light across the hills that once knew only dust and anger. Months had passed since the night of fire, since the sheriff's apology and the town's uneasy truce. Now the ranch breathed again, not as it once had, but as something new. Fresh beams framed the new barn. Young apple trees lined the field. The house still smelled faintly of cedar and riverstone, because Nayeli had filled its walls with both. Every morning Daniel woke to the sound of her singing, soft Apache hymns that rose and fell with the wind. It wasn't the life he'd built before. It was better. The people of Hollow Creek began to change too, though they didn't know it at first. It started small. A woman from town came to ask for herbs when her child caught fever. Nayeli gave her a pouch and refused payment. Then a rancher brought his injured horse. Then the schoolteacher asked if she would speak to her students about the plants of the desert. Soon, every week, children and grown folk alike gathered by the fence at sunset. Nayeli taught them names, yucca, sage, willow, tobacco, and how each held a story. She never scolded, never lectured. She just shared, and people listened. Daniel watched it unfold from the porch, pride warming through him. He had once thought strength meant standing alone. Now he saw what real strength looked like. A woman who had been treated as nothing, teaching others how to see the sacred in everything. One late afternoon, as thunder rolled over the horizon, a small wagon pulled up the trail. From it stepped a boy with a crooked hat and eyes bright as sunrise in the Miller boy. He carried a folded paper in his hands. Miss Nayeli, he said shyly, Mama says you saved me, so I drew you something. He handed her the paper. It showed the old wooden platform in town, but instead of an auction, the boy had drawn Nayeli standing on it, arms open, birds rising around her. She knelt to his level. You drew me as free, she said softly. The boy nodded. Mama says that's what you are. For the first time since she'd been taken from her tribe, Nayeli felt the word not as a dream, but as truth. Free. But not everyone liked the change. Earl, bitter and half-ruined, watched from the shadows of the saloon, nursing his shame like poison. He muttered that the town had gone soft, that a savage woman was bewitching folks. One night, full of drink, he decided to prove the world still feared her. He crept toward Daniel's ranch, a lantern swinging from his hand, the same kind of flame that had destroyed it before. But this time, someone saw. The sheriff was riding patrol along the ridge. He caught sight of Earl crouched by the barn and shouted. Earl spun, startled. The lantern slipped, shattering. Flames leapt at his boots. He stumbled, screaming, his own fire turning against him. By the time the sheriff dragged him clear, his hands were burned and his pride gone for good. It was the same lesson written in every inch of this land. What you give to the fire will always come back in smoke. When Nayeli heard, she went to him in the jailhouse. Earl looked up, expecting mockery, but she only said, "Hatred burns the hand that holds it." Then she left a small jar of aloe beside him. Instant karma, she believed, was never about revenge. It was about reflection. That autumn, the town gathered for something new, the first harvest fair. The mayor had asked Nayeli to speak, though she hesitated at first. Daniel squeezed her hand. "You have to," he said. "They need to hear what real freedom sounds like." So on a golden afternoon beneath a sky washed clean by wind, she stepped onto the same platform where months before she'd been sold. The crowd quieted. Children sat cross-legged near the front. The sheriff stood with his hat in hand. Even Earl, bandaged and humbled, watched from the edge. Nayeli looked out at them. Faces that had once judged her, now waiting to listen. "When I first stood here," she began, her voice calm and clear, "I was not seen as a woman. I was seen as a thing. But the earth never called me a thing. The river never asked who I was. It only gave me water. The wind never asked the color of my skin. It only carried my voice. Today I ask you to do the same. Look not with fear, but with truth. Every hand that plants seed, every heart that loves its land, we are the same." The crowd stayed silent a moment. Then the schoolteacher began to clap. Soon others joined, slow then strong, until the sound rolled through the square like thunder after drought. Daniel stood at the back, eyes wet. She caught his gaze and smiled. For that instant, all the pain, all the fire, all the long road from slavery to this moment, it all came together like sunlight through storm clouds. Years passed. The apple trees grew tall, their fruit red as sunsets. Children from both the town and nearby tribes came to learn from Nayeli, to heal, to plant, to speak with respect. Daniel's ranch became a refuge, not a fortress. And every year, when the harvest moon rose, the people of Hollow Creek lit candles along the canyon edge. In honor of the woman who had taught them that peace is stronger than pride, they called her the woman who changed the West. One evening, long after the children had gone home, Daniel and Nayeli sat on the porch. The air was soft and full of crickets. Daniel reached for her hand, their fingers still fitting perfectly, weathered by time but steady. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly. "The day I bought you?" She smiled faintly. "You didn't buy me, Daniel Brooks. You bought your own freedom and the freedom to see." He laughed softly. "And what did I pay?" "Everything that didn't matter," she said. They sat in silence, watching the stars gather over the valley. When the wind rose, it carried the faint sound of children's laughter from the school down the road, her school. Nayeli listened, eyes glowing in the starlight. "They will grow knowing respect," she whispered. "Then perhaps the world will forget the word slave forever." Daniel nodded, pulling her gently into his arms. "And remember love instead." The night deepened, wrapping them in its calm. Above them, the Milky Way stretched like a river of light, endless, forgiving, eternal. And in the quiet of that vast western sky, two hearts beat steady, equal, and free.